Hey everyone, it's Adam from Poutine Politics. What you're about to hear is the first episode of a 2-episode series on WEXIT. Seeing as it's all the rage in the news and on social media right now, we figured, why not do an episode on WEXIT? While we haven't necessarily been taking the situation of Alberta separating from the rest of Canada seriously, news was released earlier today that WEXIT Alberta is applying to become a federal political party. Apparently they've received their 250 signatures, I'm assuming at the rally they held in Edmonton over the weekend. So I guess that means that the Conservative Party and the PPC just aren't good enough for these people. Anyway, have a listen to our take on the WEXIT issue. First up this week is an episode on the history of Western alienation with a specific focus on Alberta. Next week we'll be covering the process that would have to be adhered to for Alberta, or any province for that matter, to break the Constitution and leave Canada. Also, since I'm terrible at self-promotion, I'm also going to mention that you can find all of our episodes wherever fine podcasts are sold: iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, YouTube, Stitcher, and so on and so forth. Putting on a podcast can be thankless work and can cost quite a bit of time and money. If you've been enjoying what you've been hearing, throwing any kind of support our way would be appreciated, which is why we've been running a Patreon page over at patreon.com/PoutinePolitics. From there, you can currently access uncut versions of our past episodes, and with more support comes more benefits in the future. Thanks to everyone that's been listening and returning every week, and welcome back to Poutine Politics.
Hey, listen, we're not Ontario-centric, you
That's right.
till we get to the 26 episodes of Doug Ford.
Happy you're on Doug Ford.
There's fires in the sky, there's ashes on the ground, the sun's invisible, it's feeling like a war zone now.
Welcome back to Poutine Politics, Canadian issues served with cheese curds. My name's Adam.
My name's Mike.
And it's time for WEXIT Week.
WEXIT Week. The first time both of us have come up with the same idea for a podcast. Different ways of approaching it, so it's going to be our first 2-part episode.
Yeehaw!
Or something.
That's me speaking in Albertan.
And there goes all our viewership from Edmonton and Calgary. Thanks, guys!
No. Edmonton, Strathcona, we're still be okay. They voted NDP.
Oh, yeah, Edmonton, we're good. Calgary,
Yes.
well, Flames are my favorite team, but see ya. Bye.
Yeah,
Have fun.
okay. I was approaching this more so from the historical aspect of Western separatism and Alberta separatism. Woo, history.
History lesson.
A history lesson. A history lesson. Because this isn't the first time that people out west have talked about separating. It's just that it's a lot more vocal. And why is it more vocal?
Facebook.
Yes. VoteWexit.com.
We've had 250,000 people sign up.
Although I just saw an article like literally an hour before we started recording that said that about a quarter of that number is definitely bots.
There's bots on Facebook?
Yeah, what a surprise, eh?
Wait.
Come on. No.
No.
Shut up. Bots on Facebook. That's impossible. I mean, look at their faces. They look completely real. On 20 different profiles. The same picture.
But they like Chevy, Chrysler, and Ford all at the same time.
Yeah. Okay, so anyways, Alberta separatism. That's what I focused on, I guess, predominantly. And let's just say there's been a few different situations where the thought of separating from Canada has occurred. It's just that, honestly, they were epic failures, to say the least. There were a few situations where separate provincial political parties formed as a result of this feeling of wanting to separate from Canada. And from my research, maybe 3 MLAs ever got elected.
Ooh.
From these separatist parties. And I'm talking, I say MLAs, members of the Legislative Assembly, like I'm talking about provincial politics, not federal politics. They've never elected anybody federally, at least from an Albertan, well, I guess Alberta or Saskatchewan separatist party. Obviously, we have the Bloc, and the Bloc was that first, federal separatist party, I guess, as it were, that actually had people elected. Although I would say they're not a separatist party anymore. Would you agree?
Yeah, they're kind of, they have no intentions of separating it, as far as I know, on their agenda.
Right. The only thing they are now is basically, we want to make sure that the voice of Quebec is heard within Canada. And people out west would argue the voice of Quebec is heard way too much.
It's an asterisk hole that you really don't want to get into.
That's right. I'm not going to get into it. I'm getting into Alberta separation or Alberta separatism. So this kind of goes back even before World War II. All right. And the Social Credit Party was one of the first parties that really kind of pushed, or well, maybe they didn't quite push the separatist movement, but they were the party that had separatist supporters. At one point, the leader of the Social Credit Party, and they were in power for a long time, was Ernest Manning. Last name sounds familiar, right?
Yes, very.
So, who's Ernest Manning? Ernest Manning is Preston Manning's father.
Ooh.
So he was the premier of Alberta for a while. But the Social Credit Party held a majority in the Alberta legislature from 1935 to 1971.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a feat.
Yes. Because essentially, either nobody was really running against them, or just anybody that was running against them didn't have a chance. Over that period of time, the Liberal Party in Alberta essentially ceased to exist. Like there is an Alberta Liberal Party, and they do run people in every election. But even this most recent provincial election in Alberta, I think they had a possibility of winning one seat, and they didn't even get it.
Like there's a few provinces like that where it's basically a two-party system at this point.
Yeah, you mean like our federal politics too?
Okay, I mean it's a literal two-party system, not a figurative two-party system.
Okay,
there is
enough.
a difference.
So to give you an idea of how important or how big of a milestone that was for the Social Credit Party is the fact that the party that took over from them was the Progressive Conservatives, and they held government from 1971 to 2015. And then Rachel Notley, the NDP, won for that one election,
which was amazing.
Yes. Well, and the reason why the NDP won is because the Conservative vote was split between the PCs and the Wild Rose.
Oh, but they still won. Like
yes. Yeah, they still won. And they held power for 4 years, and we're never going to hear the end of it because the UCP if it's not Notley, it's Trudeau. If it's not Trudeau, it's Notley.
Jason Kenney, as a politician, is very astute at who to go after and how to go after them.
Yes, very much so.
I'm not commenting on why or how or if he should, but as far as riling up his base and making sure the focus can be in certain places, Kenny's doing a good job.
One of the reasons I do want to bring up the Social Credit Party, though, and I feel like this was one of the first real almost attempts at a kind of separatist movement, as it were, was that after World War II, Alberta took on a mantle of, or I should say the Social Credit Party of Alberta took on a mantle of, quote unquote, Alberta First.
Okay.
So we've been hearing that a lot recently as well. You say over the last 10 years, America First and Ontario First and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, I always love that statement. First, yeah, okay.
So this provincial government, Social Credit Party, passed legislation to strengthen their control over gas exports.
Okay.
And the federal government basically came along and said that they were going to use the military to pressure Alberta to loosen those restrictions on gas exports.
Was that during the Trudeau eras?
No, that was actually Saint Laurent.
Saint Laurent.
Okay. So this was in the late 40s.
Oh, in the late 40s. Okay.
Yes. Around this time as well, a lot of American influence was coming into the oil and gas sector in Alberta. And this is still a period of time when the oil and gas sector was, I guess you could say, relatively new. Because late 40s, early 50s, they were still in a growth phase. And so a lot of American investors were coming to Alberta, buying out companies, taking over oil fields. And the Social Credit Party felt that this was the federal Liberals, who were the party at the time under Saint Laurent and had a majority, that this was their way of putting pressure on Alberta to keep the status quo.
Yes, because one thing in Alberta is that the oil and the natural gas and resources like that are definitely driving that economy in a huge way. Yes.
And they were already at that point as well, even though it was a relatively new industry for the province.
Yeah.
So I guess that was the first situation where I feel like there was a hint of Alberta separatism. And it wasn't necessarily a situation of saying Alberta's going to separate from Canada. It was just, we want more control over our resources.
Right. I can get that sentiment. When you feel like a higher power is taking away your ability to control your own resources, that's a problem.
Right. Up to that point, so now we're into the mid to late 50s, the progressive conservatives basically had next to no footprint in Western Canada up to that point.
Yeah, I could see that.
So Diefenbaker, when he became prime minister, landslide victory, that is kind of where the scales changed, and the Progressive Conservative Party, at least on a federal landscape, started to take more of the cut of Western Canada, which is interesting to me because if you look at especially the leaders of the Progressive Conservative Party, for the most part during this era, say from the late 50s all the way up until, well, let's say the merger, most of those leaders were from Eastern Canada.
Okay, yeah.
So it just seems odd. I mean, I get it. You can, if you're the right person, you know how to relate to everybody or try to relate to everybody. So I can get it. But it's just interesting that change in the political landscape happened so early, I guess, for lack of a better term, to me. Because before then, well, there was a federal social credit party as well. There was the precursor to the NDP was there as well, the CCF, and then they changed and then they became the NDP. But anyways, that was around the time when progressive conservatives started to kind of become the quote unquote party, as it were, for Western Canada. Whether that's important or not, maybe it is. Under the current political climate, it kind of is, because of the fact that parties like the Reform Party and the Canadian Alliance, and now obviously the current Conservative Party, have their roots in the Progressive Conservatives.
Yeah, there was definitely a big shift during all that fun stuff. I remember growing up with that. That was fun.
Oh yeah, especially the Reform Party. What was it on Royal Canadian Air Farce?
Oh man, they had a field day with the
Reform.
Poor Preston Manning. I feel bad for the guy.
No. Don't feel bad about Preston Manning, okay? Don't feel bad for Preston Manning.
I meant
he's doing perfectly fine right now.
Like, I don't mean from the standpoint of how well he's fine. Like, there's no problems. I mean from the they just harped on that one thing for so long. They milked that thing to death.
Yeah, because they could, I guess.
Yeah, like that's what they hung much trial was the reform. It's like, wow. Oh man.
And I guess another turning point, as it were, when it comes to federal elections. So the last federal election we've had in this country, where a conservative party did not win an absolute majority in Alberta, was 1965.
Really? It's 65?
1965 was the last year that essentially the majority vote in Alberta didn't go to a conservative party of some sort.
Huh.
44 years that Alberta has been voting predominantly conservative leaning.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, I don't know, I don't feel like you can blame something like that on a single generation. You know, a lot of people are saying today that, or have been saying over the last couple of years, that the problem with the conservative voter is it's the boomer voice, it's the older generation, it's the people that are retired and things like that, or are retiring, and they're blaming the strength of conservatism on the baby boomer generation. I look at something like that, and yeah, I get it that the baby boomers have been alive for that entire generation, but they can't be the only reason.
So conservative politics, and I can only speak to recent because I haven't done that kind of research. But recently, it's like, who's the biggest turnout? Is it young kids or old people? Old people are. So old people are placated towards the conservative vote by saying, "Oh, well, we need traditional values, and we're not going to move the needle in certain ways." So, you know, when you get to be a certain age, you like things the way that they were, not the way that they are now, right?
Yep.
That's the conservative MO recently, which annoys me to no end. And so I get it where that whole mindset comes from, that it's the older generations that do it. But it is what it is. I mean, do I think Alberta's ever not going to go right wing? No.
Yeah. It'll be a cold day in hell before Alberta doesn't go blue.
Right, but in the same point in time, you can say that, and you can disagree with that, but also Alberta's also the one with the highest GDP.
Yeah.
So are they wrong?
Just because they have the highest GDP of any province in the country, I don't think that necessarily I don't think that the two are necessarily correlated, right? That a high GDP is linked to conservative-leaning ideology.
You can make the argument, and obviously I'm biased as all get out, that right wing generally leads to better GDP. And I'm not going to claim, and you're not going to hear this from me, that it also means to better quality of life.
Right.
I'm not saying that.
And
I wouldn't say that. Because I'm not saying that that's necessarily true.
And I would argue that they're not necessarily the best economic stewards either. There's a chart multiple charts probably, that kind of floats around the internet, especially has been updated, say, more recently with Justin Trudeau's first term, and saying that 75% of the federal debt has been generated while a conservative / PC prime minister was in power, or while a conservative party was in power, and that's overly generalizing it, because that debt may have been incurred while a conservative party was in power, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it was their policies that led to it.
Yeah, I always say whenever you get somebody elected, there's a 2-year lag.
Yeah.
Right? Like there really is. Like when you're first elected for the first 2 years, you're still like, just because I got elected on January 1st, well, I haven't put anything through yet.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever I put through isn't going to really take effect until 6, 12, 24 months later.
Right.
So there's a 2-year lag from when you get elected to when things actually happen, so to speak. So
it's like the reverse of a lame duck period.
Yeah.
I mean, you could certainly do something wrong, but even if you didn't do anything, it can't necessarily be blamed on you to start, right?
No.
So
right.
Past that 2-year point, that's a different story, right?
Yeah. Right.
And then when you start enacting policies that lead to, again, lack of a better term, a lack of economic stewardship, then that's on you.
and I figured it out. It's because I'm not there's the 4 quadrants that, remember they did the election thing, and you could pick, and you were in one of the 4 quadrants of like progressive, social.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I can't remember what
you're talking about. You're talking about the vote compass thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was in like the top right quadrant where there's nobody.
Oh yeah.
There's no political party there, and I'm there.
Oh.
Because I'm like, I want to be fiscally responsible, but I also want to be socially aware, or whatever it was.
Right.
And
yeah.
And there's nobody there.
No, there isn't.
Just little me going, why can't we have both? I don't understand. How is that hard to not overspend and still look after people? That's what I want.
You can't overspend if there isn't as much waste as people think there is, I guess, is what I would say.
Oh, no, I mean by overspend, I don't mean overspend. I dictate it as subsidies and targeting taxes, not reducing taxes. They're not the same.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't want to reduce taxes for people.
Right.
To encourage economy.
Right. Because that doesn't work. No, it doesn't work.
It just doesn't work.
There is not a single instance of it in the world that shows that it works at all whatsoever.
Right? So that's a terrible strategy.
Yes, I agree.
Right? So let's not do that.
Let's cut the taxes that pay for this social safety net, and people will spend money on things. You're right. They'll spend money on things they don't need.
So if you cut taxes, and you cut taxes for the wealthy,
yeah,
they don't reinvest in the economy. They reinvest in themselves,
yep,
and hedge their bets. Whereas if you cut taxes on the poor or bring them up, they spend money terribly.
Yes,
but it boosts the economy as a result.
Yeah, because they're spending the money in the economy.
Yes.
Right. Yes.
They're not investing it into a painting on the wall.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
They're buying a TV. Well, I'd rather them buy a TV than invest in a painting.
All right, I'm gonna pull us back on topic.
Whatever. We never rant.
WEXIT week.
WEXIT week. Rant away.
So I would say before now, there's really been 2 instances. Calling them instances is shortchanging it, because it's more like 2 periods of time where there's really been a growth in the sentiment of Alberta separation beyond just little whispers and little minority pockets within political parties. So the first one was obviously while Pierre Elliott Trudeau was Prime Minister.
Well, he did give the finger.
Yes, the finger off the train.
That was amazing.
That's not where I was going with this, though. That's not in my list, unfortunately. Oh, he hates Western Canada.
Nah, he's just upset. Whatever.
Yeah, I don't know, whatever.
Move on.
The National Energy Program.
Okay.
How much do you know about the National Energy Program?
Not enough, unfortunately.
Yeah,
But I just don't want to because I don't want to throw things at my screen.
Right. Okay. So I should say there's technically two phases to this. So the
Okay.
first phase, because the National Energy Program started in the late 70s, early 80s. First was Petro-Canada.
Right.
Okay. So Petro-Canada was formed in 1975. Trudeau was the prime minister. He had his minority at the time, but with help from the NDP, they formed Petro-Canada. The idea of Petro-Canada, at least from what I was reading, is that still during this time, a lot of the oil production in Alberta was American-owned.
Mm-hmm.
Petro-Canada was formed and obviously given support from the government by way of subsidies and capital influx and things like that, with an attempt to essentially nationalize oil production.
Right.
The problem, obviously, is it depends on how you feel about nationalization of resources. Do you have an opinion on that?
I'm really don't care either way.
Okay.
Like you think I would be like one way or the other. I'm not. If it works, the only problem with nationalizing anything is that it's all about how well it's done. So
Right.
it doesn't matter. Like it's like any company. If you have somebody that's running it poorly, it's going to do poorly. If you have somebody running it well, it's going to do well.
Right.
Like it's about the leadership of it.
I would say the situation with nationalized resources and very specifically oil that people like to point to most recently and say, see, this is why nationalism doesn't work, is Venezuela.
But that's because of the person running it.
Right, exactly. Venezuela, the problem is not that nationalization couldn't work. It's that the people running it were corrupt before they were given the reins to run the nationalization program. Nationalization of oil and gas in Russia. Similar situation, right? Gazprom.
Well, yeah, Russia's not corrupt. Just wait, they're not corrupt, right? They listen to us. They're
Yes.
definitely not corrupt.
Definitely not corrupt.
Definitely not corrupt.
RT, please, if you're listening, sponsor us.
Definitely not corrupt.
I feel like that's part of the problem where, and I kind of feel the same way you do, where, it's hard to say. I feel like whether it's nationalized here or not, maybe it wouldn't make that much of a difference. And so the argument could be, well, then why should we nationalize if it's not going to be much of a difference? But at the same time, if we keep talking about wanting to be in control of our own destiny, as it were, with natural resources, why wouldn't we nationalize our natural resources?
Are you actually asking me that question? The
Yeah,
simple
kind of.
reason is that in a perfectly capitalized society, if you put, this goes to the argument against nationalization versus privatization. Privatization, if you're in a pure capitalist situation, the best survive and the best can do the best if
Right.
you allow them to just do whatever they need to do. That's an idealistic way of looking at it. The problem is corruption. Now you get corruptions on both sides, so it's literally pick your poison. You either have somebody, the politician, that can be corrupted or can be mismanaged.
Yep.
Or you can have the company that's corruption or mismanaged, and you have the same problem.
Right.
Right. So it's pick your poison. There's arguments for privatization. More often than not, I like privatization over nationalization, but I understand the benefits with large project with this, and that's what this is.
Yeah.
When you go to the large scale, it becomes harder against nationalization because a private company doesn't have the resources to put it in.
Right.
Right.
And
There's a reason why private companies aren't going to the moon. The reality is that private businesses can't do large ventures. And that's the only argument I can see for nationalizations. Private companies can't do large investments, and that's where you need to nationalize.
And I feel like from what I was reading, that was the purpose of Petro-Canada. Part of the purpose of Petro-Canada. The other part was to protect Canadian interests. But obviously, there was a lot of naysayers towards Petro-Canada, which over time eventually led to its, not dismantling, but it ceased to be a crown corporation, eventually was sold off. It's currently owned by Suncor. They still exist, obviously. We see Petro-Canada gas stations everywhere, but it's not a crown corporation anymore.
No.
It's just another private venture, basically.
Yeah.
So Petro-Canada didn't work, essentially, is what this boils down to. So I suppose you could say chalk one up for Alberta. Or the West, I guess, because Saskatchewan needs to be included in this because obviously Saskatchewan has a pretty strong resource market as well.
Yes.
So I'm not going to just say it's Alberta. It's both, predominantly. So then the second thing was the National Energy Program. The National Energy Program was brought in because of the oil crises that occurred in the 70s.
Yes.
The first one was in 1973. Oil prices crashed, kind of like we saw back in 2008 and then again in 2015. This is when this is one of those situations where people would be lined up at gas stations for hours trying to get gas because there was a shortage. Happened in both of these situations. The 1979 oil crisis was tied more so to the changing government in Iran. If you've read enough about that or if you've heard enough about that, you kind of know what's going on there, and that's outside of the scope of our story. But anyway, so again, the National Energy Program was formed to say, well, we need to protect the interests of Canadians and Canadian resources, and we need to protect prices for what oil can sell for. We need to try and ease interprovincial trade, and we need to, it's going to be better for everybody. Those who are exporting oil would say this was a terrible idea. And it didn't last very long as a result. Part of the issues with the National Energy Program was the fact that there were restrictions as to where the oil could be sold. There were restrictions as to how much the oil could be sold for.
Yep.
As a result, when prices were going up, Alberta and Saskatchewan were making way less money because the federal government was restricting the price of oil to a certain level.
Yeah, that's the other problem with nationalization too. I forgot about the politics aspect of it. Policy change can take forever.
Yes.
Whereas a private business can do it tomorrow and not care.
Right. So not that these are the specific numbers, but let's say if essentially the National Energy Program would have caused a situation like this. Let's say if the price of oil, just the standard price of sweet crude oil or something like that was $100 a barrel. The National Energy Program would fix the price, say, at $70 a barrel, because again, the viewpoint was, well, we should be using the resource within our own country. So if we fix the price of oil at a lower amount, then say Irving Oil maybe would be able to buy more oil from Alberta and Saskatchewan, the companies in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and get a better price and keep the oil within the country.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously did not turn out the way that it was supposed to. So in Alberta, they have something called the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund.
Oh.
Okay. So this was created. Let's just say it isn't exactly used for this anymore, but it was created so that Alberta could take a certain percentage of the revenues from non-renewable sources and set it aside and invest it so that they would be able to use it to grow in other sectors. Whether it was technology, whether it was just other business sectors, whether it was now, let's say, this trust fund could have been used for expanding into renewables.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It was formed back in 1976, so right around the time that Petro-Canada was formed.
Right.
And because of the National Energy Program, there's estimates that Alberta may have lost the capability of putting somewhere between $50 and $100 billion into this trust fund because what they were investing at the time was 30% of non-renewable revenues.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. Like when anybody's ever talked to me about Alberta's or Western Canada's willingness to exit, I'm like, they have a reason why they're upset.
They have many reasons why they're upset.
Many valid reasons.
Yeah.
More so than some other, there's something in my throat, provinces have.
Yes. Yes, very much so. The last little instance of time, and which, again, whether you want to view it as like a separatism thing or at least more of a regional thing, was the formation of the Reform Party.
Yes.
Okay. So the Reform Party wasn't a separatist party, but the Reform Party did also form essentially around the same time as the Bloc Québécois did. So the Reform Party formed more so as kind of the voice of the West.
Yes.
Okay. And it wasn't necessarily a feeling of separatism, but just the West is getting a raw deal.
Yep.
Simple as that. What happened was, so Brian Mulroney wins a landslide victory in 1984.
Mhm.
Progressive conservatives come to power federally.
Mhm.
All right. They start dismantling the National Energy Program pretty much immediately. Within a year and a half, it's gone.
Right.
So the National Energy Program lasted about 6 years.
Yep.
So much for trying to nationalize our resources.
Right. Yep.
Obviously a failed experiment. And so obviously, they dismantled this program, something that Alberta and Saskatchewan were just like dead set against because of how negatively it affected them. And they're like, these guys are great. They're looking out for our best interests.
Yep.
Except as soon as that was done, they basically got ignored again.
Well, I don't. Do you have any notes about what they consider the tipping point was?
The CF-18s
Yeah.
was one of the tipping points.
Yeah, that's the one that I remember.
Yeah. So Mulroney is from Quebec.
Yes.
Bécamo is where he's from. I
Yes.
may have completely butchered the pronunciation of that.
We know
but
our
whatever.
fantastic pronunciation.
That's right.
It's flawless.
It's French. It's great. Anyways, there was a maintenance contract for the CF-18s that, despite the fact that there were better bids from companies in Western Canada, Mulroney awarded it to Bombardier.
Yes. And that was, I guess, the last straw. And
That was one of the last straws that led to the formation of the Reform Party.
Yep.
So, but you'll notice through each of these different points is that it still was never really separatism.
No.
It was more just the West is getting a raw deal and we need better representation.
Yes.
So what's different about today then in comparison to these examples?
What's basically different is that social media allows people to have cute little terms that they can get behind.
Right. Fair enough. And I feel like that's where the combination of social media and mainstream media is making this particular movement more visible and louder. And obviously when you're louder, more people hear you. It's taken more seriously, I guess. Although I still don't think we should necessarily take it as seriously as any of these previous situations.
No, there's reasons why you shouldn't take it seriously, and that's the part that I'll be getting into.
All right. So this is the history of Alberta, quote unquote, separatism, because again, I don't necessarily feel like it was separatism so much. Yes, there were people that supported the idea of Alberta separating from Canada, but it was a very small, I wouldn't even necessarily call them vocal minority.
Yeah, I would call it Western voice.
Yes.
Trying to be heard.
Right.
Over top of the conglomerates of Ontario and Quebec.
Right. So this has been a history on Western separatist feelings. That's not the word I was going for.
This has been WEXIT.
This has been WEXIT week, part 1. Stay tuned for part 2. My name's Adam.
My name's Mike.